Hi everyone, I'm Sean and this is Pens at All. Here we do fountain pen reviews, ink reviews, sometimes some paper reviews, but in general we like to have a little bit of fun with fine writing. Today's video is going to be a review of Diamine Oxford Blue ink, one of my favorite blues. When I was younger, I didn't really like blue very much. In fact, if you want to see a little bit more about that, check out my blog, pensatall.com. It wasn't until a couple of years ago that I even started using blue as an ink in my writing. You see, I started working at a place where using blue or using something not black was required for signing documents, and I had to start using blue. When I started to get back into fountain pens, I was looking for a way to use fountain pens at work, and so I needed something blue. As I was going through all of the different websites that offered fountain pen inks, I found Diamine Oxford Blue. I love this blue, and today I'm going to show you why. One of the cool things about Diamine Oxford Blue that I found out when I was researching for this video is that it seems to be named after Oxford University in England. The school color of Oxford University is a very dark, deep blue, and this is a very dark, deep blue. Now that's in opposition to Cambridge University, which is a much lighter blue than what Oxford uses. I love that about Diamine inks. They use interesting naming conventions to give their inks their names. Check them out, and especially check out the rock and roll editions, which I think were only available in Germany, but they're still pretty cool. Now, the ink itself is a very dark blue. It's so dark, in fact, that sometimes it can look black in very, very low light. That's one of the reasons why I like it, because I really like dark colors. I mean, I wear black t-shirts all the time. Now, in addition to being a dark, deep blue, the ink has very little shading. It has a pretty consistent line throughout. Now, you'll get a little bit darker spots where the ink pools, but that darker area isn't so much that it looks like shading compared to the rest of it. It's really just a little bit of a darker shade than the rest of the line. So you're going to get a very consistent line with Diamine Oxford Blue. My favorite feature of Diamine Oxford Blue ink is something that people don't talk about very often, and that is the fact that it has a bit of a red sheen. Now, red is one of my favorite colors, and I love seeing red in lots of things. And one of the really cool things about this particular ink is that on the right paper, you get a wonderful red sheen when the ink dries. I didn't even notice this the first time I used the ink because I was using it on bad paper at first, and then when I started to use better paper, I still didn't notice it. It wasn't until I started using Tomoe River paper, where the paper is designed in such a way that the ink dries on the top of the paper rather than soaking into the surface. When the ink is allowed to dry on the top of the paper, then you get to really see that sheen much better than when it's being absorbed into the paper. And I love that about this ink. It's a deep, dark blue, which I really appreciate, but also in the right instances and circumstances, it has this wonderful red sheen. I love this ink. So now, let's go look at a little bit of a writing sample. Okay, so here we have Diamine Oxford Blue. This is one of my favorite blues, as I've mentioned, and if you go ahead and read my blog, you'll see one of the reasons why. It's a nice, deep, dark blue that has some character to it, and it's just a really nice blue. So let's see a little bit of a writing sample. As you can see, there isn't a whole lot of shading that you get with this particular blue. However, it is a nice rich color. Now, in terms of line variation, obviously that's going to depend upon the nib, but you can also see the shading or lack thereof in this. I mean, even when I kind of force it a little bit, there's not a whole lot of shading from this steel nib. You can see that it pools towards the end, which is normal, but even when the ink is not being pooled, it isn't providing much shading. As you can see here, the ink takes a while to dry. It's a fairly wet ink, even in a more fine nib. If you saw my Noodler's review, you'll see that that's a very wet nib, and so it took a long time to dry. This Visconti medium nib is not a particularly wet nib, but you can see that the dry time is still pretty good in terms of longer. Let's see how it does with water, and I'll give you a little hint right now. It's not very good. Let that dry for a bit. But you can already see that the ink is starting to dissolve because it's water soluble with just that little bit of water that's dripped on there. I don't like doing like the big huge water tests that you see with some other ink reviews, or even like the dot test. I like to show it what it does to actual writing, and as you can see, it pretty much destroys the actual writing. So if you're looking for something that is water resistant, this is not going to be the best ink for you. All right, so what are some celebrations for Diamine Oxford Blue? Its blueness blows me away. It's very saturated. It's not very watery. It has mostly color in it, and so that makes it a very, very blue. It's a dark blue, and I like that too because it gives it a certain formality that I really like to have in my inks, especially for inks that I'm going to be using at work. Though it is a very dark blue, there is no mistaking this ink for anything other than a deep, dark blue. Even in low light situations, as I mentioned earlier, it's still distinguishable as blue, even though it's almost black. Now, it's not a blue-black, it is blue through and through, but it is a very dark, deep blue, and I love that. It's a very smooth ink. As you're writing across the page, you can feel the nib gliding across the page. The ink flows wonderfully. It's almost like writing with baby oil, especially if you're using a very, very wet nib, like in the review I did of the Noodler's Triple Tail Flex, which is a very wet nib. This particular ink even feels even smoother with that particular pen. It's a very smooth, very glassy feel writing with this particular ink. On really good paper, it's an enjoyable experience. That smoothness and the image coming across on the page as the ink starts to dry, it makes you feel good. It's a really wonderful feeling when you're writing with this particular ink. And as I mentioned before, the red sheen that comes out in this particular ink is just delightful. And again, it may be a personal thing, but I love that. The day that I discovered it was a wonderful day in my use of this particular ink. It made me love it even more. It gives a unique quality to the ink on the page, and I absolutely love that. Okay, so I like this particular ink, but is it perfect? Well, no, nothing is. As I mentioned before, I came across this ink because I was looking for something that I could use at work where I need to write my signature in blue ink. Unfortunately, this ink is not water resistant. And so I run the risk of, if a page gets water on it, then my signature going away. So that would be one thing that I think would make this blue even more perfect, is if Diamine could make it in a water resistant formula. Now, I understand water resistant inks are not super common in fountain pens, and there's a reason for that, because you need the flow of the water soluble ink in the pen. But some places are making water resistant inks. Check out Noodler's for some of their water resistant inks. I haven't yet, and I probably will, but if you're looking for something that's water resistant, you're not going to find it with the Diamine Oxford Blue. For some folks, the lack of shading that you have or don't have with this particular blue may be a deal breaker. It isn't all that interesting in the sense of shading. And I like that, because for what I use it for mostly, I don't want a lot of shading. I want a nice bold line. But if you're looking for a nice shading ink, this is not going to be the best one for you. Now, if you don't care for dark inks, then again, this isn't going to be the best ink for you either, because it is a very dark blue. I love that. That's one of the things that I love about this particular blue. But if that's not your thing, then this is not going to be the best kind of ink for you. Okay, final thoughts. Diamine Oxford Blue. As you could probably tell, I really like this ink. It has converted me over to using blue as an ink in my pens. In fact, I have now started using it beyond my use of it at work. Before, I only used black ink. Now, as I'm getting back into the fountain pen hobby, I'm starting to use more and more different kinds of inks, even blue. The red sheen and the dark, deep nature of this particular blue makes me fall in love with it. That's one of the reasons why I love it so much. At the same time, if you like dark colors, then this isn't going to be the best ink for you. It's also not water resistant, but that may not be a deal breaker for you. I think this is a great, great blue. If you want to find a nice, dark, deep blue, Diamine Oxford Blue is going to be a good one for you to check out. Feel free to check out my blog for some more pictures and further ideas about this particular ink. There'll be a link in the description. Also, feel free to debate the characteristics of the ink in the comments. Especially, do you think it should be water resistant? Do you like the dark quality? Is the red sheen a little bit too much? Have at it in the comments, and I'll join you there too. So thanks a bunch, folks, for joining me today for this review of Diamine Oxford Blue ink. I really appreciate you coming by. If you're so inclined, please hit that like button. Also, subscribe. That way you'll be notified of future videos. And go over to my blog, pensatall.com, and check out some more thoughts I have on fountain pens as well as inks. Y'all are amazing, and I'll catch you later.